All right, so we're back to the third part on the presentation. So the last part, I've just concluded the brief mention of what vicarious liability is, and I presented two reasons that Tadros actually wrote in his paper, and we finish off with perpetrator-centered reasons. Now, it's a bit odd to think about how perpetrator-centered reasons play into distributive justice. So I'm going to suggest a way to approach this, because it's a bit odd when we take it at face value. Why do people who did wrong deserve to be treated fairly? So how does perpetrator-centered reasons actually motivate vicarious liability? How is it appealing, right? We want to convince everyone that we need vicarious liability from the perspective of the perpetrator. Okay, so one way we can approach this, because Tadros' thesis is a form of distributive justice, is to turn to a Rawlsian conception or Rawlsian formulation of how perpetrator-centered reasons might operate, might work. Okay, so I'm just going to invite everyone to think about the veil of ignorance, right? And the initial position or the original position as proposed by John Rawls is that everyone is behind this veil of ignorance. Okay, everyone knows that they're going to war. Okay, but importantly, they don't know two things. First is whether they are going into whether they're participating in a just war or an unjust war. Okay, they don't know which side they are taking. Second is they don't know what roles they will play in the war. They might be the combatants, they might be the frontliners, they might be the civilians, they might be the politicians, they might be the Adolf Eichmanns, right, who actually committed atrocities throughout the whole war. So we don't know any of this. So we don't know whether we are participating in just or unjust. We don't know what roles we are playing in that war. Now, as Rawls would suggest, what sort of principles might we agree such that when the veil of ignorance is lifted, right, we would not be untreated, or we would not be treated unfairly. Okay, so if we can understand what's happening behind the veil of ignorance, then we can say that, oh wait, perhaps we might also need to consider fairness from the perspective of the perpetrators, because I don't know whether I would take up the role of a combatant or non-combatant who is waging an unjust war. Okay, so this form of distributive justice actually motivates us to take on a formulation from the perspective of the perpetrator. So let's just say that you're randomly assigned the role of a combatant. You might want to say, hey, wait, this isn't fair if I'm the only one liable to be harmed. Okay, it's not fair that I can't complain against being shot in the foot. Okay, to put it very, very crudely, Tadros' thesis is about honor among thieves. Okay, so once again, we don't know. We don't know which position that we'll take. So we want principles to be fair to everyone before the veil of ignorance is being lifted. Okay, so this is one way we can think about Tadros' vicarious liability and the perpetrator-centered reasons for advocating vicarious liability. Okay, so before he actually moves on to elaborate why vicarious liability generates fairness, or it supports fairness amongst combatants and non-combatants, he actually considers why a strict non-combatant immunity thesis is problematic, and how is it unfair to the combatants. So recall that this entire paper centered around perpetrator-centered reasons. We want to know why is it unfair to the combatants. Okay, so he writes on page 55 here is that those taking part on the just side will form and execute plans to kill combatants rather than non-combatants. Even when killing, non-combatants will be as good or better in advancing the cause. Okay, so in a sense, it is not fair to the combatants that they are intentionally targeted. All right, so he gives us an example why this is this is unfair. So let's just consider his example here, whether to delay. We can deliberately target and kill 10 non-combatants working in a military research lab that's about to build a weapon that will be deployed in war. Or we could wait until they finish the project, and if they deploy it, then we have to kill 10,000 combatants, and in the process, we have to sacrifice 10,000 of our own men. And both options lead to the same outcome. We win. Okay, so notice how Tadros is playing with the numbers here, right? So he's pitting killing 10 non-combatants against 10,000 combatants, and he's saying that, look, it's unfair to the combatants if we need to kill such a large number of them rather than killing those 10 combatants. Okay, and we can go back to the idea of risk and benefits, right? The combatants are bearing more risk in battle, right? But the benefits are shared, I would say, disproportionately towards amongst the non-combatants. So the people who benefit from a war are usually the civilians and the non-combatants rather than the combatants. But the combatants bear a disproportionately larger risk than the non-combatants. So from this perspective, it's unfair to those frontliners who take on the risk of being killed on the battlefield. All right. So yeah. So he continues to say that a strict principle of non-combatant immunity may increase combatant casualties. It may also increase the risk that each combatant face, and it may increase the overall death tolls. And he keeps using the word may, because what he's suggesting here is following a strict non-combatant immunity doesn't always work. It shouldn't operate on as a universal moral principle. And he writes this in his paper really subtly, right? It's I think the word he uses is it's a good rule of thumb, but it shouldn't be a guiding principle. And it's reflected here again by his use of the word may. Okay, so a risk here is better read as stakes. So Tadros is saying that it's unfair for non-combatants that a large number of them have to die when they couldn't have died. And it's also unfair to state that they incur more casualties that's necessary to defeat them. So it's just a rehash of what I just mentioned earlier, is that they bear the risk, disproportionately larger risk than the non-combatants, right? So it is not really fair that we intentionally target the non-combatants and grant, that we intentionally target the combatants and grant non-combatant strict immunity. Okay, so just at this same section, when he argues against non-combatant immunity, he also considers what Farb considers in her essay as well, is the causal contribution. So the question is vicarious liability a decent option to explain why intentionally killing non-combatants is permissible? Sorry about the typo here. So the idea is Tadros doesn't think that causal contribution can explain why non-combatants are liable, and he rejected them based on the same grounds as Farb rejects them. Is that it's difficult to find a threshold of contribution that makes them liable. So again, it's a negative thesis. Is that okay? Causal contribution doesn't work, then we need something else, perhaps vicarious liability. Okay, so this is an open question, and I think the deeper worry is this next question, right? So based on whether to delay, why is the ethics of large number insufficient to explain the permissibility, if it is, of killing non-combatants? That is, if I could kill 10 or 1,000 or 10,000 to win the war, eradicating fewer lives should be a sufficient explanation to why it's permissible to kill 10. So the question is, why think the moral statuses, i.e. liability of these individuals, are relevant in these cases? So if you just take a look at this thought experiment, right? So Tadros is asking us to compare between killing 10 non-combatants or killing 10,000 combatants. So why isn't the idea that I should take as few lives as I can sufficient to explain why I should take this option? Like why does liability have to come in? What does it have to do with any of this? Okay, it's a question that he doesn't really address explicitly. It's a question that really asks why we need his thesis of vicarious liability. Okay, it's an open question. I don't have a concrete response to it, but You can check our handout. I provided a short explanation. It's just my interpretation. I won't put in this presentation because I haven't actually thought through it. Yeah, so the brief idea is, without the concept of liability, from my point of view, we can't explain proportionality involved in intentionally targeting non-combatants. So if without liability, there is no proportionality. So it could justify us doing very atrocious things to the 10 non-combatants and to the 10,000 combatants. Okay, if we attach liability into these cases, into our options, we are also bringing in principles of proportionality and necessity. Right? There are certain constraints as to what we can do to these individuals insofar as we do not wrong them. All right, I hope that's clear. Yeah, so this will be my final part on the reading. I would present a part on some further questions and critiques. So in sum, before I pass on to Ian, is I think Tadros thinks that it's unfair that non-combatants like civilians are granted strict immunity while combatants bear all the risk and liability. Right? This is because everyone shares the benefits. I put prospective in brackets because as we'll see later on, there are some issues with just identifying with benefits. So as such, we have to think about how certain non-combatants bear obligations, right, in virtue of their relationship with benefits with the combatants. Okay, so two very important ideas in Tadros' paper is it's the idea of distributive justice and it's the idea of benefits. Right. So with that, I'll end this section 3, and I'll pass it on to our next presenter, and I'll see you back in the Q&A section again.